The first time the most dangerous man in Chicago looked at me, he didn't see a waitress carrying bourbon. He saw a girl trying not to shake. My shift started at 6, but by 5:30 I was already standing in the employee bathroom under a flickering light, dabbing concealer over the faint shadow near my wrist, and telling myself the same lie I'd been living on for months. You're fine. You're late. Rent is due on Friday. Keep moving. The mirror above the sink was warped at the edges, making my face look stretched and tired, which, honestly, felt more truthful than flattering. I twisted my sleeve down until it covered everything and practiced a smile that looked polite enough for a 5-star dining room and empty enough for no one to ask questions. Outside, the city was soaked in cold March rain, the kind that turned sidewalks glossy and made headlights smear across the pavement like paint. By the time I reached La Rosette, my flats were damp, my fingertips were numb, and my phone had already buzzed 3 times in my coat pocket with messages I didn't open. I didn't need to. I knew the rhythm by heart. Where are you? Who are you with? Don't ignore me. Inside the restaurant, warmth hit me first, then the scent of garlic, butter, expensive wine, and polished wood. Crystal glasses caught the chandelier light. Low jazz drifted through the room. Men in tailored jackets spoke in easy voices that sounded like they had never once checked a bank balance before buying groceries. Women laughed softly over candlelight, all sleek hair and gold jewelry, while I tied my apron in the service hall and reminded myself that for the next 8 hours, I was not Chloe from a second-floor apartment with a broken heater and a lock that stuck when it rained. I was just another smile with a tray. Table 12 is yours if Marissa doesn't stop crying in dry storage. My manager snapped as he shoved a stack of menus into my hands. And keep your head up tonight. We've got important guests. Important guests. At La Rosette, that meant politicians, old money, men with private security details, and the kind of people who never wrote their own names on a reservation because someone else always did it for them. I told myself I didn't care. I cared about tips. I cared about making it through the night without spilling anything, without dropping anything, without giving anyone a reason to look too closely at me. Then the front door opened just after 7, and the whole room shifted in a way that was hard to explain unless you'd felt power enter a space before. It wasn't loud. No one gasped. No music stopped. But conversations softened around the edges. My manager straightened his tie. One of the bartenders looked down for half a second like he was remembering an unpaid debt. I followed everyone else's attention before I could stop myself. 3 men walked in from the rain in dark coats, but only one of them made the room feel smaller. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and calm in a way that didn't ask for attention because it already owned it. His black hair was still damp at the temples. His watch caught the light once as he handed his coat off. He didn't smile when the hostess greeted him, but she smiled too much anyway. Private dining. My manager whispered to no one and everyone. That's Damian Moretti. I had heard the name before, the way everybody in Chicago had heard it, half as rumor, half as warning. I should have looked away. I tried to. But just then, the buzzer clipped to my apron vibrated, and my hand jerked hard enough to rattle the glassware on my tray. The sound was small. My mistake was smaller. But when I caught the tray against my chest and looked up, Damian Moretti was already looking straight at me. His eyes did not move away when mine did. That was the strange part. Most men noticed a waitress only long enough to ask for another drink or complain that the steak was too cool, but Damian Moretti looked at me like he had caught something I was trying very hard to hide. I dropped my gaze first, because that felt safer, and because my manager was already hissing my name from the service station as if a 2-second pause could ruin the whole night. I turned fast, set the tray down with more care than I felt, and reached for the order slip clipped beside the register. My hands were still unsteady, not enough for anyone else to call attention to it. Maybe, but enough that I could feel every tiny betrayal in my fingers. Private dining room, my manager said, pressing a bottle of Bordeaux into my hands. You are serving the first round. Do not talk unless they ask you something. Do not stare. Do not make mistakes. I almost laughed at that last part. It was the kind of warning people gave as if mistakes were choices. As if anyone woke up wanting to tremble in front of expensive men and polished silver. I took the bottle and followed the hallway past the main dining room, through a narrow stretch of shadow and soft gold light, toward the private section hidden behind velvet-paneled doors. My flats made almost no sound on the carpet, but my pulse felt loud enough to fill the hall. I told myself to breathe. In through my nose. Out slowly. Keep the bottle straight. Keep your chin level. Keep your sleeve down. The private room was larger than I expected, with dark wood walls, a long table set in white linen, and a city view framed by rain-streaked glass 20 floors above the street. Damien sat near the center, not at the head, which somehow made him seem more powerful, not less. Men around him were talking in low, controlled voices, their watches flashing under the dim lights, their phones face down beside crystal tumblers. The whole room smelled like cedar, smoke, and money. I stepped inside, offered the practiced smile I had worn all evening, and moved toward the first guest on the left. No one looked at me for the first few seconds, which was a relief. Pour. Turn the bottle. Step back. Move right. Pour again. It was simple when I focused only on the movement. But then I heard one sentence from the man nearest the window, spoken quietly enough that I knew it was not meant for me. If he talks to the feds, the deal in Milwaukee is dead by Monday. My hand paused for half a beat. That was all. Just half a beat. Still, the pause was enough for the man across from him to glance up, and enough for my nerves to sharpen like glass. I moved too quickly after that. The heel of my shoe caught the edge of the carpet. The bottle tilted. I stopped it before a single drop hit the table, but the motion pulled my sleeve back, and cool air touched the skin I had spent 30 minutes covering. I knew what was visible before I even looked. The faint yellowing shadow. The fingerprint-shaped discoloration near my wrist. Not fresh. Not gone. My stomach dropped. I tugged the sleeve down at once, whispering an apology no one had asked for. One of the men muttered that it was fine. Another returned to the conversation as if I were furniture. But Damien did not. He leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression unreadable, and let the silence stretch just long enough for me to feel it. Then, in a voice so calm it almost made my knees weaker, he said, "Leave the bottle, Miss Parker." I froze. I had never told him my name. For 1 second, I forgot how to breathe. The bottle was still in my hand, heavy and cold against my palm, and all I could think was that I had done something wrong without even understanding how much wrong cost in a room like this. Miss Parker. He had said it so easily, as if my name had always belonged in his mouth, as if he had known it before I ever stepped through those velvet doors. I set the bottle carefully on the table beside the last empty glass, and tried not to let my face show the panic rising in my throat. "Yes, sir," I managed, because it was the safest thing I could think to say. None of the other men reacted much. One checked his phone. Another lifted his glass. Whatever world they lived in, waitresses were background noise unless someone important decided otherwise. And Damien Moretti had decided otherwise. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. His voice was even, almost quiet, but the room seemed to listen anyway. I kept my eyes lowered, not out of submission exactly, but because looking directly at him felt like standing too close to a fire. 8 months, I said. Almost 9. And before that? The question caught me off guard. Customers did not ask where you had been before they needed more water. "A diner in Bridgeport," I answered. "Breakfast shift." One of the men at the table gave a faint, amused exhale, like he could not picture me carrying coffee in some family place with laminated menus and chipped mugs. Maybe he was right. La Rosette had taught me how to move more quietly, how to disappear with better posture. Damien did not smile. His eyes stayed on me, dark and steady, and I had the strange feeling that he was measuring not my words but the spaces between them. "You almost dropped the bottle," he said. My fingers tightened at my sides. "I am sorry. That is not what I said." The room went very still after that. Not hostile, just alert. I lifted my gaze before I could stop myself, and for the first time I saw his expression clearly. Not angry, not mocking, something sharper. Something that made me think of a man who noticed the difference between a cracked glass and a shattered one. "I asked because your hands are shaking," he said. Heat rushed to my face. I wanted to deny it, to say the room was warm or the tray was heavy or I had skipped lunch, but all of those excuses felt fragile under his eyes. "I am fine," I said softly. It came out too fast, too rehearsed. One of the older men near the end of the table shifted in his chair, uncomfortable in the way people get when truth enters a room dressed as a simple sentence. Damien looked at my sleeve, then back at me. He did not ask me to roll it up. He did not embarrass me by making the silence cruel. He just leaned forward enough to rest one hand beside his glass and said, "No, you are not." I do not know why those 4 words landed harder than anything else. Maybe because they were spoken without pity. Maybe because they sounded less like judgment and more like fact. I felt my throat tighten around a reply I could not risk giving. "Miss Parker." My manager cut in suddenly from the doorway, his smile thin and strained. "The kitchen needs you back on the floor." He was trying to rescue the situation, or maybe rescue the restaurant from whatever happened when a server became interesting to the wrong man. I stepped back at once, grateful for the interruption. But before I could turn, Damien reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and placed a small cream-colored card on the white tablecloth. No logo, no flourish, just a number written in dark ink. He slid it toward the edge nearest me and said, "Keep that with you tonight." I slipped the card into the pocket of my apron so quickly it felt like a reflex, like hiding evidence before anyone else could see it. My manager was already stepping aside for me, his smile fixed and brittle, but I could feel the weight of the room following me as I backed toward the door. Not the whole room, just one pair of eyes. I kept mine on the brass handle until I was out in the hallway, then let the door close behind me with a soft click that sounded far too gentle for the way my pulse was pounding. The corridor suddenly felt narrower than it had a minute earlier. I stood there for half a breath, one hand pressed against my apron pocket, making sure the card was real and not some stress-born hallucination, before my manager grabbed my elbow and steered me toward the service station. He did not squeeze hard. He did not need to. His voice was low and sharp enough on its own. "What was that?" he asked. "Nothing." It was the answer I gave to almost everything these days. Nothing happened. Nothing is wrong. Nothing to worry about. But he was not in the mood for protective lies, especially not the kind that threatened the mood of his most important customer. "Do not play stupid with me, Chloe. You froze in front of Moretti. You do not freeze in front of men like that." I looked past him to the dining room, where candlelight warmed every table into a different version of luxury. A couple near the windows clinked glasses and laughed softly. A server glided past with oysters on ice. Somewhere in the kitchen, someone shouted for a pickup. The whole restaurant kept moving, polished and seamless, while I stood there trying to act like my life had not tilted sideways over a cream-colored card. I said I was sorry. I told him. "It will not happen again." He stared at me for a moment, then exhaled through his nose like he was deciding whether I was worth the trouble. "Go run table 14. Marissa is still a mess, and if the private room asks for anything, you bring it quickly and you keep your eyes down." I nodded and moved before he could say more. The next hour passed in pieces, none of them steady. I carried plates I could not taste and poured water I could barely see. Every few minutes my fingers brushed the outline of the card through my apron pocket just to confirm it was still there. I hated that I kept doing it. Hated that a stranger with a quiet voice and a dangerous last name had inserted himself into my thoughts so completely. But it was not only him. It was what he had noticed. Or maybe what he had refused to pretend not to notice. Most people in my life had become experts at looking away. Friends from high school stopped asking why I canceled plans. Neighbors kept their eyes on the mailboxes. Even the cashier at the corner store had learned to hand me change without lingering on the days I looked tired enough to disappear. There was a terrible convenience in other people choosing not to see you. It let you remain broken without ever having to name the fracture. But Damien had looked straight at it. Near 8:30, I was carrying a tray of espresso cups past the service hall when the phone in my coat pocket buzzed again. Not my work buzzer. My personal phone. I nearly kept walking, but something cold moved through me anyway. I set the tray down at the station, pulled the phone out, and saw 3 new messages on the lock screen. "I know where you are. Do not make me wait in the rain. We need to talk." My stomach dropped so suddenly I had to grip the edge of the counter. I did not need to read the name at the top. Ryan had a way of entering a room without entering it at all. Through a screen. Through a tone. Through the simple arrangement of words that made every place feel less safe the moment they arrived. "Chloe." I jumped so hard the phone nearly slipped from my hand. One of the bartenders was pointing toward the private hall. "They asked for you again." I looked down at the screen, then toward the velvet doors, then back at the 3 messages glowing like a warning in my palm. And for the first time all night, I did not know which direction was more dangerous. The hallway to the private room felt longer this time, like the carpet had somehow stretched beneath my feet just to give my thoughts more room to turn against me. My phone was still in my hand when I reached the velvet doors, the screen dark now, but no less heavy, and I stood there for 1 second too long staring at my own reflection in the brass trim. I looked composed from a distance. Hair pinned up, black dress pressed flat, thin gold name tag catching the light. A girl doing her job in one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. But up close, I knew better. Up close, there was too much strain around my mouth, too much tension in my shoulders, too much fear packed behind my ribs for anyone observant enough to miss it. And Damien Moretti had already proven he was observant enough. I slipped my phone back into my apron pocket, smoothed my sleeve down over my wrist, and pushed open the door with a hand that was steadier than I felt. The conversation inside stopped the moment I entered. Not dramatically, not like in movies where everyone turns at once. It just softened into a pause, a natural opening where power made room for what it had requested. The men at the table were halfway through dinner now. Candlelight flickered off silverware and wine glasses. A porterhouse sat sliced on one plate, juices gathering in the center like polished amber. A city map glowed on one of the screens mounted near the wall. Numbers. Streets. Something about distribution routes, if I had to guess. I kept my gaze respectfully low enough not to invite attention and high enough not to look suspicious. "You asked for me?" I said, aiming the question at the room and not at him, though I knew exactly where the answer would come from. "I asked for coffee service," Damien said. "But I also asked for you." The men around him said nothing. One of them stirred ice in his glass and looked faintly amused, as if he were watching a card game where only one player understood the stakes. I moved toward the sideboard and reached for the espresso pot, grateful for a task that gave my hands a purpose. Pouring was easier than thinking. Porcelain cups, tiny silver spoons, cream on the side, though none of these men looked like they took cream. "Sugar?" I asked the gray-haired man nearest me. He shook his head. The next did the same. When I reached Damien, I asked nothing. He looked like a man who would tell the world what he wanted without being offered options. I tilted the pot over his cup, but before the coffee touched porcelain, he spoke. "Your phone has been vibrating all night." I almost spilled again. Only almost. I caught the pot in time, set it down carefully, and prayed my face had not changed. "It is not my place to comment," he added, and the strange thing was that he sounded like he meant it. Not apologetic, just precise. He turned the espresso cup once on its saucer, slow and quiet. "But if someone is making you uneasy while you are at work, that becomes relevant." I looked at him then because I could not help it. His expression had not softened, but there was no mockery in it, no curiosity sharpened into cruelty. Only attention, the kind that made lying feel flimsy. "It is nothing," I said again, and this time I heard how tired the words sounded. He glanced at my pocket, where the shape of the phone was still faintly visible beneath the apron fabric. People who say that too often usually mean the opposite. I should have let the silence close over us after that. I should have stepped back, offered the next cup, disappeared into the safe little role of employee and stranger. Instead, maybe because I had slept badly for weeks, or because fear had worn me thin enough to let honesty slip through, I asked, "Why do you care?" The room did not move, but it changed. One of the men set down his fork. Another leaned back, interested now in a way he had not been before. I had crossed some invisible line, and I knew it the second the question left my mouth. But Damien did not bristle. He did not punish me for sounding too direct. He looked at me for a long moment, then reached for the cream-colored card I had hidden earlier and tapped one finger against the table beside it. "Because you walked into this room already afraid," he said. "And because whatever is waiting for you outside this building is not finished with you yet." My throat tightened so fast I had to look away. The rain pressed harder against the windows behind him, soft and relentless, turning the city beyond. The glass into a blur of white streaks and red taillights. I thought of Ryan outside somewhere in that weather, jaw set, messages unanswered, patience thinning into something uglier. I thought of my apartment key in my coat pocket, of the deadbolt that never quite caught on the first turn, of the sound footsteps made in the hall outside my door. "Miss Parker," Damien said quietly, and I hated that my name sounded safer when he said it. "When your shift ends tonight, do not leave alone." The words followed me out of the private room like a second pulse. Do not leave alone. They should have sounded controlling coming from a man like Damien Moretti, the kind of man people lowered their voices around without being told, but somehow they did not. They sounded like information. Like he was not making a demand so much as naming a fact I had been trying not to face. I cleared the last cup, steadied the tray against my hip, and left before my face gave away too much. The hallway air felt cooler than before, touched with the sharp scent of lemon polish and steam drifting out from the kitchen. Behind me, the private room door shut softly, sealing away the men in tailored suits and low voices, and the city map glowing on the wall, as if entire neighborhoods could be shifted with a fingertip. Out here, the restaurant resumed its polished rhythm. A hostess smiled at a couple removing rain-dark coats. Plates moved in and out of the kitchen window. Glassware chimed. Someone laughed near the bar. It was strange how ordinary everything looked when my thoughts no longer felt ordinary at all. I brought the tray back to the service station and set it down more carefully than necessary, then reached into my apron pocket and touched the card again. Just once. Thick paper. Clean edge. A phone number written in dark ink by a hand that looked decisive even in the shape of the numbers. I should have thrown it away. That would have been the smartest thing. Men like Damien did not hand out favors without meaning attached to them, and I had no business being noticed by someone whose name carried the kind of gravity his did. But I did not throw it away. I slid it deeper into the pocket instead, like hiding a secret from the rest of my life. My phone buzzed again almost on cue. The sound turned my stomach before I even looked. One new message. Then another. Then a third before I could unlock the screen. Answer me. I am outside. Do not embarrass me. The last one made my hand go cold. Not because of the words themselves, but because I knew the tone behind them. Ryan always wrote like the conversation had already been decided, and I was the only one too slow to understand it. He could make guilt sound like a command. He could make fear feel rude. I locked the phone and shoved it back into my pocket so fast the edge caught against the fabric. You all right? It was Lena from the bar, stacking wine glasses onto a black service mat, her red lipstick perfect even 3 hours into the rush. I liked Lena because she asked questions like she was offering a door, not a spotlight. Just tired, I said. She studied me for a second, then tilted her head toward the front windows. Rain streamed down the glass in silver lines, blurring State Street into a wash of headlights and reflected neon. Storm is getting worse, she said. You getting picked up? The answer rose automatically. Yes. Almost there. We are fine. Instead I heard myself say, I have not figured it out yet. She gave me a look that said she heard the truth hiding under that better than I wanted her to. Take a rideshare, she said. Do not do the train this late in this weather. I nodded, though we both knew rideshare money was not always there when rent week came around. Before I could respond, my manager called my name from the main floor and sent me to table 9 with another bottle of wine and a smile I had to assemble in a hurry. The next 40 minutes moved in fragments. A birthday dessert with a sparkler. A couple arguing so quietly they almost looked affectionate. A businessman asking whether the sea base was wild-caught like that was the tragedy of his evening. I did what I always did. I carried. I nodded. I disappeared. But underneath it all, tension kept winding tighter inside me, thread by thread, every time I thought about the curb outside the restaurant and the black stretch of sidewalk beside. The alley where staff left after midnight. At 9:15, I passed the host stand and saw him through the front windows. Ryan stood under the awning across the street, hands in the pockets of his jacket, rain misting around him in the wash of traffic and streetlight. He was not shouting. He was not pounding on the glass. Somehow that made it worse. He was just waiting, still as a promise I had already broken, and when he lifted his head and looked straight through the window, I knew he had seen me too. For a second, the whole restaurant disappeared. Not literally. The music still played, silverware still touched china, and somewhere behind me a server apologized for bringing the wrong side dish to the wrong table. But my body stopped hearing any of it the moment I saw Ryan standing under that awning. Rain slid off the edge above him in clean silver lines, catching the amber streetlight and turning it into something almost beautiful, which felt unfair. Beautiful was not the word for anything connected to him anymore. His jacket was dark with weather at the shoulders. His head was slightly tilted, his expression unreadable through the glass, but I knew him well enough to understand the stillness. Ryan only went quiet when he thought silence would do more than words. My hand tightened around the wine bottle I was carrying until my knuckles ached. I looked away first. I had learned that too. Not because it changed anything, but because meeting his eyes in public always felt like agreeing to a conversation I did not want to have. "Chloe," a guest at the host's stand asked, and I blinked hard, forcing myself back into the room. It was table 11 wanting their check. I nodded, smiled, and moved, every motion suddenly too deliberate, as if someone had replaced my bones with glass and expected me not to notice. I printed the receipt. I collected a signed billfold. I thanked the couple for dining with us in a voice I barely recognized as my own. All the while, the awareness stayed under my skin. He is still there. He can see the door. He saw you see him. When I passed the front windows again 3 minutes later, he had not moved. He was looking down at his phone now, thumb scrolling once, calmly, like a man, waiting for a meeting to begin. My phone buzzed in my apron pocket almost at the same moment. I did not have to check to know it was him, but I checked anyway. That was another thing fear does. It makes you obey before a command has even been spoken out loud. "Come out for 2 minutes. Do not make this a scene." I stared at the words until they blurred. There were no capital letters. No threats. No insults. Nothing anyone else would point to and call dangerous. That was part of why I had stayed as long as I had. Because from the outside, so much of it looked ordinary. Concern. Frustration. A boyfriend wanting to talk. The damage lived in tone, in timing, in the way my stomach dropped before I even opened the message. "You look pale." I turned too fast and found Lena standing beside the espresso machine with a linen towel over one shoulder. Her eyes flicked toward the windows, then back to me. I hated how quickly she understood. "Is that him?" she asked quietly. I could have lied. I almost did. But I was tired of defending something that was slowly hollowing me out. "Yes," I said. The word came out thin. Lena swore under her breath, not loudly, just enough to sound sincere. "Do not go out there alone." The sentence hit me harder than it should have, probably because I had heard almost the exact same warning less than an hour ago from a man I should not have trusted and somehow already did a little. "I still have an hour," I said. "Maybe he will leave." Lena gave me a look that said she knew better. Men like that do not leave when they think waiting is a weapon. Before I could answer, the private room door opened at the end of the hallway, and one of Damien's men stepped out. I noticed him because he did not move like restaurant staff or like any guest I had ever seen. He moved like purpose had been fitted into a suit. Mid-30s, clean haircut, charcoal tie, face too calm to be friendly. He glanced once across the floor, found me immediately, and walked over with the kind of quiet confidence that made people shift out of his path without understanding why. "Miss Parker," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. "Mr. Moretti would like a word before dessert is served." My mouth went dry. Lena straightened beside me, but said nothing. Across the street, Ryan was still under the awning, waiting. Behind me, somewhere past velvet doors and white linen and low voices, Damien Moretti was asking to see me again. And standing there between the two of them, with the rain dragging silver lines down the glass and my phone still warm in my pocket, I had this sudden, terrifying feeling that tonight was no longer going to end the way I had planned. The man who came for me did not raise his voice, and somehow that made it feel even more final. He stood beside the espresso machine with his hands loosely folded in front of him, patient in the way only highly disciplined people ever are, as if he already knew I would follow because the request itself had been measured before it was spoken. "Now?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded in my own ears. "Now," he said. Lena glanced toward the front windows, where Ryan was still visible through the rain-blurred glass, then back to me. She did not try to stop me. She just leaned closer and said under her breath, "Whatever this is, it is better than outside." I should not have believed that so easily, but I did. Maybe because every nerve in my body had been pulling in that direction since the moment Damien Moretti noticed the shaking in my hands. I handed off my current table to Lena, ignored the question in my manager's eyes when he saw me step away from the floor again, and followed the man down the hall toward the private room. My pulse kept pace with my steps, quick and uneven, but underneath the fear was something else now. Curiosity, maybe, or the dangerous relief of knowing that at least one person in this building understood that the threat waiting outside was real. The velvet doors opened before I could touch them. The room beyond had changed since my last trip in. Dinner plates had been cleared, fresh drinks had replaced empty glasses, and the city map on the wall had been turned off, leaving only the reflection of candlelight in the dark screen. Most of the men were gone. Two remained near the far end of the table, speaking quietly with folders open in front of them, while Damien stood near the windows with one hand in his pocket and the other resting at his side. He looked out over the rain-soaked city like it belonged to no one and everyone, all red taillights and slick streets and towers fading into mist. When the door closed behind me, he turned. That was all. No dramatic pause. No theatrical smile. Just that simple movement, and suddenly the whole room felt aware of him again. "Thank you," he said to the man who had escorted me, then nodded once toward the hallway. We were alone a second later, unless you counted the city watching through 40 feet of glass. I stayed near the door because it felt smarter. He noticed that too, of course. He seemed to notice everything. "Your shift ends at 10:30, he said. It was not a question. I swallowed. "Yes. And the man outside has been there for 43 minutes. The accuracy of it made me blink. "You had someone watching?" "I had someone paying attention." His tone was level, but not cold. Just exact. He moved toward the table, picked up a glass of water instead of whiskey or wine, and set it in front of the empty chair nearest me. Not in order to sit. Just an option. "You are frightened," he said. "You have been frightened all night. You were frightened before you came to work." I looked at the untouched water, then at him. "You do not know me." "No," he said. "But I know fear when I see it. And I know what it looks like when someone has spent too long pretending they can manage it alone." The room was warm, but my hands felt cold again. I hated that he was right. Hated that part of me wanted him to keep being right, because every time he named the truth, something inside me loosened that had been clenched for months. "Who is he?" Damien asked. He did not say boyfriend. He did not say husband. He did not give Ryan a title he had not earned. I stared down at the white linen tablecloth, at the tiny crease near the edge where somebody's cuff had pressed into it earlier, and for a second all I could hear was rain striking the windows in soft, steady waves. "Someone I used to live with," I said at last. The sentence felt safer than the full truth. "Used to." His voice did not change, but the word sharpened slightly. "He still has a key," I admitted. Saying it aloud made shame rise hot in my chest. I asked for it back. He said he lost it. Damien was quiet for a moment, and in that silence I realized he was not surprised. That unsettled me almost as much as comforted me. "Miss Parker," he said, and when I looked up, his gaze had gone darker in a way that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with certainty. "When you leave this building tonight, you will not be going back to that apartment." The certainty in his voice should have made me argue. It should have made me bristle, step back, remind him that I was not one of his employees or his family or anything at all to him beyond a waitress he had noticed in a bad moment. Instead, I stood there with my hands curled at my sides, staring at him across the white linen tablecloth, and felt something dangerous and unfamiliar rise inside my chest. Relief. It came so fast it almost embarrassed me. Relief that someone had said the thing I had not been able to say to myself in weeks. "You cannot keep going back there. You cannot keep calling it manageable just because you are still standing." I looked away first, toward the windows where rain traced thin silver paths down the glass, and the city beyond had dissolved into smeared light. "I have work in the morning," I said, because practical excuses were easier than honest ones. "My things are there." Damien did not move. "Things can be replaced." The sentence was simple, but it hit something tender in me anyway. People always say that as if it is comforting. As if a lamp is only a lamp and a sweater is only a sweater and a chipped coffee mug does not become precious when it is the only object in your apartment that does not remind you of fear. "Not all of them," I said quietly. For the first time that night, something in his expression shifted. Not softness exactly. More like understanding recalibrating itself. He reached for the water glass, took a measured sip, and set it down with the same control. He seemed to apply to everything else. "Then tell me what matters, and it will be brought to you." I let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh, except there was no humor in it. "You make that sound easy." "It is easy," he said. "What is difficult is convincing someone they deserve to leave." The words landed hard enough that I had to grip the back of the empty chair beside me. He was too direct, too observant, too calm about things I had spent months wrapping in excuses and hiding under routine. I thought about Ryan outside under the awning, waiting with the kind of patience that always meant the conversation later would be worse for the delay. I thought about my apartment door, the deadbolt that never caught on the first turn, the narrow hallway that held sound too long, The way I had started checking the shower curtain and the closet, as if fear could be managed through small rituals. He was not always like this, I said before I could stop myself. It was the oldest reflex I had. Defend. Explain. Sand down the truth until it sounded less alarming. Damien's face did not change, but something colder entered the silence between us. That sentence, he said, has kept many people in places that were already harming them. Shame burned up my throat. Not because he was cruel, because he was right. I folded my arms, then immediately dropped them again when the motion tugged at the hidden bruising beneath my sleeve. The room felt too still, too clear, like there was no clutter left for me to hide inside. I do not know what you want from me, I admitted. Nothing, he said. The answer came without hesitation. I want nothing from you. But I am not going to stand in a warm room while a frightened woman walks back into a situation she is not safe in simply because no one offered her another option. That was the moment something in me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for exhaustion to show through all the careful stitching I had held together with tips, routines, and denial. I sat down because my knees suddenly felt unreliable, and for a second I could not look at him at all. I stared at the untouched water glass, at the distorted reflection of candlelight on its surface, and willed myself not to cry in front of the most controlled man I had ever met. When I finally spoke, my voice came out thin and rough. If I do not go back tonight, he will know I told someone. Damien stepped closer then, not enough to crowd me, only enough to make sure I heard every word that followed. No, he said. He will know someone finally paid attention. Before I could answer, there was a soft knock at the door. It opened an inch, just enough for the same man in the charcoal tie to speak into the room. Sir, he said. The man outside just crossed the street. The room changed before I did. Not in sound, not in light, in pressure. That was the only word for it. Pressure. The kind you feel before a summer storm breaks over the lake, when the air goes still and every living thing seems to pause without knowing why. Damien did not turn toward the door right away after the warning was delivered. He just looked at me for one measured second, as if making certain I understood what was happening before he let the rest of the world back into the room. Then he said, "Stay here," and crossed to the doorway with the same unhurried control he seemed to carry into every moment. The man in the charcoal tie stepped inside fully now, closing the door behind him with quiet care. "He is at the front entrance," he said. He asked the hostess for Chloe Parker by name. Hearing my full name spoken in that room, in that tone, made my stomach tighten so hard I had to grip the edge of the chair. It was one thing to imagine Ryan waiting outside in the rain. It was another to know he had crossed the street and brought himself right up to the glass, right up to the polished brass and candlelight and carefully managed elegance of La Rosette, carrying the mess of my private life into a place where I had worked very hard to seem untouched by it. Damien's gaze shifted once toward the windows, then back to his man. Has he raised his voice? No, touched anyone? No, Damien nodded, like he had expected exactly that answer. Then he is still trying to appear reasonable. The sentence went through me, like cold water because it was true. Ryan never started with chaos. He started with composure, concern, a conversation, the appearance of patience. That was how he made other people doubt what I felt long before I had the courage to trust it myself. I can go talk to him, I said, rising halfway from the chair before I realized I was doing it. Both men looked at me. Damien's expression did not harden, but it closed. No, he said. Just one word. Calm. Final. If I do not go, he will keep waiting. Perhaps, Damien said. But you are not stepping out there to manage his mood. I sank back into the chair, breath unsteady. Rain ticked softly against the windows behind him. Somewhere beyond these walls, the restaurant kept moving, glasses clinking, servers pacing, credit cards sliding into leather folders. But inside the private room, everything had narrowed to a few simple truths. Ryan was here. Damien knew it. And for reasons I still did not fully understand, he had decided that mattered. He will tell them I am overreacting, I said quietly. The hostess, my manager, anyone who listens. The shame in that admission was immediate and familiar. It felt childish, somehow, to fear being made unbelievable more than anything else. Damien studied me for a moment, then said, "That only works when no one in the room can recognize performance." He turned back to the man by the door. Tell the front desk that Miss Parker is unavailable and that the guest at the entrance is not to be admitted past the lobby. Yes, sir. If he refuses to leave, then he can learn the difference between a request and a boundary. The man nodded once and left. The door clicked shut again, and the silence that followed felt different now. Not empty, guarded. I looked at Damien, really looked at him, at the ease in his posture, the stillness in his hands, the complete absence of hesitation in the way he had taken control of a situation that had been controlling me for months. Why are you doing this? I asked. He did not answer immediately. He moved to the table, lifted the glass of water he had set out for me earlier, and held it toward me until I finally took it. My fingers brushed the cool rim. Because fear distorts judgment, he said. And tonight, yours has been doing all the talking. I swallowed hard, staring down at the water trembling faintly inside the glass because my hand was still not steady. You do not even know if I deserve the trouble. His eyes held mine then, dark and unwavering. Miss Parker, he said, safety is not something people earn. Before I could respond, my phone began to ring in my apron pocket, loud in the quiet room, and when I pulled it out, Ryan's name was glowing across the screen. The sound of his name on my phone felt louder than the ringtone itself. Ryan. 5 letters glowing against the dark screen, as if the device in my hand had become a door I had spent months trying to hold shut with both palms. My thumb hovered over decline, but I did not press it. I just stared, breath shallow, while the vibration moved through my fingers and up my wrist like a pulse I did not want. Damien did not ask who it was. He had already read the answer in my face before I ever turned the screen toward myself. Do not answer if you feel obligated, he said. His voice was low, steady, a counterweight to the panic trying to build in my chest. Answer only if you want information. The distinction hit me harder than it should have. I had spent so long answering out of fear that the idea of answering for my own reasons sounded almost foreign. The phone kept ringing. I could picture Ryan in the lobby now, jacket damp from rain, expression carefully composed, one hand holding the phone to his ear while he made himself look like the patient one, the worried one, the man inconvenienced by my behavior. My hand shook once. Then I pressed accept and lifted the phone to my ear. Hello. My own voice sounded small to me, but not broken. Not yet. There you are, Ryan said, and that familiar tone slid through the line at once. Warm on the surface, sharpened underneath. I have been standing in the rain for almost an hour, Chloe. I looked at the windows without seeing them. You should not have come here. I came because you stopped answering. He let a beat pass, then softened his voice in that deliberate way he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. I was worried. Damien remained where he was, a few feet away, saying nothing, but his silence changed the call. It reminded me that I was no longer alone in hearing what worry sounded like when it arrived wearing control. I am at work, I said. My shift is not over. That is interesting, Ryan replied. Because the man at the front desk says you are unavailable. Shame flashed first, hot and immediate, followed by something I had not expected. Anger. Small. Unsteady. But there. Then you have your answer. He exhaled into the line, a quiet sound that used to mean I should start apologizing. Do not do this tonight. Do what? Embarrass me. The words settled into the room between my ear and the phone like dust. There it was. Not concern. Not love. Not confusion. Embarrassment. A bruise with a cleaner name. I closed my eyes for 1 second. When I opened them, Damien was still watching me with that same unreadable focus, not intruding, not rescuing, just making it impossible for me to pretend I had not heard the truth. Ryan, I said, and for the first time in months I used his name without trying to soften what followed. You need to leave. Silence met me from the other end. Not absence. Calculation. Who is with you? He asked at last. I felt the old instinct rise at once, the instinct to explain, to smooth, to make everything smaller than it was. I swallowed it. That is not your business. Another pause. Then his voice changed, not louder, just flatter. You are making a mistake. I almost believed him out of habit. That was the frightening part. Habit can sound so much like truth when you have lived inside it long enough. My gaze drifted to the cream-colored card still resting near the edge of the table where Damien had left it, the dark ink of the number precise and unhurried. A choice. A boundary. Proof that another version of this moment existed if I was brave enough to step into it. No, I said quietly. I think I have been making the same mistake for a long time. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it, but once the sentence was out, something inside me steadied. Not all at once. Not completely. Just enough. Ryan let out a short breath that sounded almost like a laugh without humor. You are going to regret talking to me like this. Before fear could answer for me, Damien took one step closer, not enough to crowd, only enough for certainty to enter the space beside my shoulder. I did not look at him, but I felt him there. Goodbye, Ryan, I said, and ended the call. The silence afterward rang in my ears. My hand was still trembling, but it was a different tremble now, less like collapse and more like aftermath. I lowered the phone slowly and stared at the blank screen, at my own faint reflection staring back from the glass. Damien waited one measured breath before he spoke. What did that cost you? He asked. I looked up, surprised by the question. Not what did he say? Not are you all right? What did that cost you? I could not explain it, not cleanly. The years of apologizing first. The way my body still expected punishment after choosing itself. The grief of realizing how long I had mistaken endurance for love. More than it should have, I whispered. Damien's expression did not soften, but his voice did, almost imperceptibly. Then let that be the last expensive thing he takes from you tonight. At that exact moment, someone knocked once on the door, and the man in the charcoal tie stepped back inside. Sir, he said, glancing at me only briefly before returning his attention to Damien. He is leaving the lobby, but he is not leaving the block. The update should have made me feel trapped again, but instead it clarified the room. Ryan was still out there, still circling the edges of my night, like persistence itself could rewrite the word no. The man in the charcoal tie waited just inside the doorway, rain-dark reflections flickering across his polished shoes from the windows behind us, and Damien did not react with surprise or irritation. He reacted the way a man reacts when a fact arrives exactly where he expected it to. Keep eyes on him, Damien said. If he approaches the staff exit, let me know before he gets there. Yes, sir. The door shut quietly behind the man, and for a moment the only sound left was the weather tapping against the glass and the faint pulse still running through my own body. I looked down at the phone in my hand, now dark and still, and felt the aftershock of what I had just done. It was a strange thing, standing in a private dining room 40 stories above the city after telling someone who had occupied so much of my fear to leave. I did not feel victorious. Not yet. Mostly I felt tired. Tired in the bones, in the throat, in the place behind the ribs where people store all the words they were too careful to say when it would have mattered most. Damien watched me for one measured second and then drew out the chair across from mine. Sit, he said, not sharply, just plainly. I was already seated, but I understood what he meant. Stop preparing to flee. So I let my shoulders lower by an inch. I set the phone on the table. I wrapped both hands around the untouched water glass because I needed something cool and solid to hold. How long? He asked. There was no confusion in his tone about what he meant. How long had I been living like this? How long had fear been shaping my decisions so thoroughly that even kindness felt suspicious at first touch? I stared at the water. Almost a year, I said. Saying it aloud made the number feel heavier than it had in my head. It did not start bad. My mouth curved faintly, but there was no humor in it. I know that sounds like every story you have ever heard. It sounds common, Damien said. Not small. That answer made something in my chest loosen in spite of myself. Common, not small. I had spent too much time minimizing my own life because I was ashamed of how ordinary the pattern looked from the outside. He was charming, then difficult, attentive, then watchful, protective, then possessive. It is alarming how long a person can stand inside a slow change and still call it normal because each day is only 1 inch worse than the last. At first he just wanted to know where I was, I said, then who I was with, then why I took too long to answer, then why I needed my own friends if we were serious. He had an explanation for everything. He always had a reason that made me sound selfish if I pushed back. The words came more easily once they started, not because they were easy but because silence had been so expensive for so long. By the time I realized I had started rehearsing my texts before I sent them, it already felt easier to adapt than to argue. Damien said nothing, which turned out to be a mercy. He did not rush to fill the spaces where shame was trying to breathe. He let me have them without making me perform my pain into a cleaner shape. I moved out 6 weeks ago, I went on. I thought that would be the hard part. I thought once I was gone, it would become obvious. But he kept saying he only needed time, that he wanted to help with bills, that he still cared. And I stopped because the next part was harder to admit. And you were tired, Damien said. I looked up. His expression remained composed, but there was a kind of precision in it that felt almost gentle. Not softness. Recognition. Yes, I said. The word barely made it out. I was tired. It is expensive to leave anything when you are already surviving paycheck to paycheck. He knew that. He offered to pay my electric bill 1 week, my groceries another. He made help feel like debt. Outside, lightning flashed somewhere far off behind the clouds, turning the windows white for a fraction of a second before the city returned in smeared red and gold. I thought of my apartment again. The narrow kitchen. The thrift store lamp beside the couch. The tiny square bathroom where I had stood under a flickering bulb and covered bruises before work. I kept telling myself I was not the kind of woman this happened to, I said quietly. That if I just stayed calm enough, smart enough, grateful enough, everything would level back out. But it never leveled out. It just trained me to accept less. Damien leaned one hand on the back of the chair opposite mine, listening with an attention so complete it made the room feel stripped of everything unnecessary. You said he still has a key, he said. Has he entered since you left? I stared at the condensation gathering around the base of my glass. Twice that I can prove, I admitted. Maybe more. Things moved. A cabinet left open. My spare blanket folded differently. Once my bedroom window was unlocked, and I know I locked it. Before work. Even now, saying it aloud felt unreal. Like I was describing someone else's life from a documentary, I would have judged too quickly from the safety of a couch. Why did you not tell the police? He asked. The question was practical, not accusing. I gave him the only answer I had. Because I did not have enough that anyone would call proof, and because part of me was afraid he would find out I tried. Damien's gaze held mine for a long moment, dark and unwavering. He already counts on that fear, he said. Do not keep paying it. The sentence sat between us like a door opening in a room I had convinced myself had no exits. I did not know what to do with hope yet. It still felt fragile, still felt like something that could be taken away if I looked at it directly for too long. But for the first time all night, I let myself imagine a future measured in mornings instead of emergencies. Damien straightened, reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, and set a second card on the table beside the first. This one had an address written across the front in the same clean, decisive hand. A secure apartment on Oak Street, he said. Staffed. Private. You can stay there tonight. I looked at the card, then up at him. Why would you have that ready? His expression did not change. Because I prefer solutions to sympathy. I should have laughed. Instead, my throat tightened. The address blurred for a second before my eyes cleared again. Outside, the rain kept falling over Chicago in silver sheets, washing the windows, softening the city, while inside that room I realized the shape of the night had changed completely. I was not being asked to endure until morning anymore. I was being offered a way out. For a moment, I could not touch the card. It lay on the white linen between us with its clean black ink and impossible promise, an address on Oak Street written as if safety could be as simple as a location and a locked door. Maybe for men like Damien Moretti, it could. Maybe in his world, solutions arrived in envelopes and cars, and quiet men in charcoal ties who knew how to make danger keep its distance. In mine, safety had always been temporary. Conditional. 1 good week away from being replaced by apology, panic, or unpaid bills. I looked from the address to his face, searching for something in his expression that would tell me I had misunderstood him, that there was some hidden cost coming after the kindness, some line in small print I had not yet read. But Damien only stood there with one hand resting lightly on the back of the chair across from me, composed as ever, his dark suit catching candlelight at the shoulder, his gaze steady enough to make panic feel childish in comparison. Tonight only? I asked. It was not the smartest question, but it was the truest one I had. He understood that immediately. Tonight first, he said. Tomorrow we can discuss what comes after when you are arrested, and somewhere no one can enter without permission. Permission. The word moved through me slowly. I tried to imagine my apartment without fear inside it, and could not. I tried to imagine a night where every noise in the hall did not make my body tense before my mind had even caught up, and that felt almost harder. I still need my things, I said. My voice sounded distant to me, like I was hearing myself from the far end of a tunnel. My medication, my clothes, my grandmother's box from the closet shelf. I cannot just disappear. You are not disappearing, Damien said. You are relocating the part of your life that matters most. The rest can be collected properly. I let out a breath that trembled on the way out. You make it sound so easy. No, he said quietly. I make it sound necessary. The truth of that settled over the room with a weight I could no longer argue against. Outside, rain kept sliding down the windows in silver ribbons, blurring Chicago into headlights and shadows and reflections that looked more beautiful from a distance than they ever did up close. My shift had 10 minutes left. Somewhere beyond these walls, dessert plates were being cleared. Credit card receipts were being signed. Coats were being lifted from checkroom hangers. People were ending their evenings and going home, never knowing that in a private room behind velvet doors, a frightened waitress was being handed away out of the life she had been enduring one careful excuse at a time. I reached for the card at last. The paper was thick and cool against my fingertips. Real. If I go with your people tonight, I asked. What happens when he realizes I am not coming back? Damien did not answer right away. He moved to the windows, looked out over the rain-swept city for one measured second, then turned back to me. He will realize the world has changed, he said, and he will be expected to change with it. There was no thread in his voice. That was what made it so powerful. He did not need to perform anger to make certainty unmistakable. He spoke the way other men signed contracts. Final. I looked down at the address again. Oak Street. Staffed. Private. Safe. The words did not appear on the card, but they hung around it anyway. Why me? I asked softly. There are probably 100 women in this city who need help more than I do. Perhaps, he said. But tonight you were the one standing in front of me, trying to balance fear on a tray and call it professionalism. The line should have stung. Instead, it almost made me smile through the tightness in my throat. Almost. And because you listened? I asked. His expression shifted by a fraction, something like dark amusement touching the edge of his mouth and disappearing just as fast. No, he said. Because you were trembling and still came back into that room when you were called. That is not weakness, Miss Parker. That is someone running out of places to place her courage. My eyes burned unexpectedly at that, and I looked down before the feeling could show too clearly on my face. No one had ever described me that way before. Not brave, not struggling, just difficult, emotional, overthinking, too sensitive. It is astonishing how quickly a person can begin to return to herself when someone names her pain without insulting her for carrying it. A soft knock came at the door, and the man in the charcoal tie stepped inside again. Sir, he said, her manager has been told Miss Parker is leaving through the private elevator due to a guest request. The car is ready downstairs. The man outside is still on the block, but he has moved closer to the alley side. Damien nodded once. Good. Then he looked at me, and the room narrowed too. That look alone. You have a choice, he said. You can leave the way you planned, walk into the weather, and keep negotiating with a fear that has already taken too much from you. Or you can step into the elevator, go somewhere secure, sleep without listening for a key in the lock, and let tomorrow begin from a different place. My fingers tightened around the card until the edge pressed into my palm. I thought of my apartment, the weak deadbolt, the thrift store lamp, the closet shelf with my grandmother's cedar box. I thought of Ryan waiting for me to behave predictably, to apologize, to come out, to keep choosing survival in the shape he recognized. And then I thought of the sentence Damien had spoken earlier, the one that had stayed with me more than any other. Safety is not something people earn. My shift badge was still pinned to my dress. My feet still ached from 10 hours of carrying plates. My makeup was probably fading over the bruise near my wrist. Nothing about me looked transformed. And yet, as I rose from the chair and slipped the Oak Street card into my apron beside the first one he had given me, I understood that a life does not change when fear disappears. It changes the moment you stop arranging yourself around it. I looked up at Damien, steadied my voice, and said the words that finally sounded like they belonged to me. I am ready to leave.